Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa PBS Foundation, as well as generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa PBS.
As legislators gather in Iowa's capital city of Des Moines, judicial issues reverberate through the economy and society. The Chief Justice of the Iowa Supreme Court, Susan Christensen, addresses challenges and opportunities for the state's judicial system before a joint session of the Iowa General Assembly. Coming up, the 2021 State of the Judiciary Address.
Chair recognizes the Sergeant at Arms.
Mr. President, Lieutenant Governor Adam Gregg has arrived in the House chamber.
Please escort Lieutenant Governor Gregg to his seat. The chair recognizes the Sergeant at Arms.
Mr. President, your committee to escort Governor Kim Reynolds has arrived.
The committee will escort the Honorable Kim Reynolds to the rostrum. The chair recognizes the Sergeant at Arms.
Mr. President, your committee to notify and escort Chief Justice Christensen has arrived.
The committee will escort the Honorable Susan Christensen, Chief Justice of the Iowa Supreme Court, to the rostrum. It is my pleasure to introduce to you the Chief Justice of the Iowa Supreme Court, Susan Christensen, to deliver the State of the Judiciary message.
Thank you. Please be seated. That's a gavel. Never seen it so up close and personal. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker. Oh, did I get that wrong? I did. You guys changed it. Yeah, right. And members of the General Assembly, Governor Reynolds, who's behind me. It feels very awkward to have her sitting behind me. Lieutenant Governor Gregg, state officials, colleagues, family, and friends. And to all of you Iowans who are watching remotely today, and those of you seated before me, thank you so much for this opportunity to address this joint convention of the 89th General Assembly of the Condition of the Judiciary. I think we all know this is my first time. I just proved it a minute ago. To give Iowa's Condition of the Judiciary. Let me start by introducing myself to you. I am Susie Christensen, and I am from Harlan, Iowa, born and raised there. And I married my high school sweetheart, Jay. He's here today with me. Together, we have 5 children. 2 of them are able to be with me today, Reese and Nick. Reese's wife, Kara, is part of the family, not here today. Our other children who could not join me are Adam and his wife, Erin, Sadie and her husband, Derek, and our 18-year-old son, Cass. Nobody can have an audience like this with a hot mic and not say the names of your grandchildren out loud. So for them, here it is: Logan, Carson, Connor, Emily, Jack, and Carson. After high school, I received my legal secretarial diploma at AIB in Des Moines, and then we got married. I worked for a few years as a secretary, and then I started college. I went to 4 colleges in 4 years, and then I moved back home to Harlan, and I started commuting to Omaha for Creighton Law School for 3 years. I am used to people giving me the stink eye for my educational journey. I'm used to it, and I own it. Maybe it's not the path recommended by guidance counselors, or certainly not parents, and I may not even recommend it for my own children. But at that time in my life, it was the right path for me. Each and every move that I made, which means every time I changed a school, was for the benefit of my family. That has to be for the right reason. After graduation from law school, I then went and practiced 16 years in Harlan as a prosecutor and a family law lawyer. In 2007, I became a district associate judge, and I practiced primarily in family law. Then in 2015, I was appointed to the district court, and I remained there until 2018, at which time I was appointed to the Iowa Supreme Court. Thank you, Governor Reynolds. Throughout those years when I was a lawyer, or when I was a judge, I am so used to seeing people walk into our courthouses all across the state, and when they walk in, you can see it. They are full of hope. They're hoping to not get convicted. They're hoping to get custody of their child. They're hoping somebody will just listen to their story. And I took comfort in providing comfort to those people. I liked guiding them through our legal system. I think they could perhaps see that reassurance in my eyes. Maybe they could hear it in my voice. Go upstairs, 3rd floor, I'll meet you by the water fountain. Or maybe I would say, when you testify, be sure to project your voice. The court reporter has to get down every word. And most importantly, I would say, I got your back. I'll be there with you every step of the way in the courtroom. This past year, none of those things can happen. Elevators allow 1 or 2 people. Water fountains have been shut down. Court reporters will probably smack you if you try to project your voice. And they're trying to understand what you're saying behind a mask. And most importantly, once again, how can a lawyer in hushed conversation give his client the advice that he or she needs? So exactly what is the state of the judiciary? What a time. What a time for me to give the first one. I'm quite certain that nobody else has given a similar one. It's been turned on its head for almost a year. We can't just shut our doors and say, see you when things get better. It's not like people have a choice to come do business with us. We tend to do something called subpoena or summons. We don't have the luxury of sending out an invitation with an RSVP. So let me share with you how I have responded to previous challenges in my life. Our oldest son, Nick, was born with cerebral palsy, and I remember a time in his young life when I was feeling sorry for myself and wondering, what's the future hold? How am I going to do this? How do you do this? And I came across a super ugly picture with a beautiful saying, and it said, we cannot change the wind, but we can adjust our sails. And it may seem quite simplistic, but it absolutely grabbed my aching heart, and it gave me an abrupt and a permanent change in my mindset. So if COVID is now the wind of which we cannot change, how can the judicial branch adjust its sails? Let me tell you what we did. A small group of individuals got together at the judicial branch building on a snowy day on March 14th, which was a Saturday. Everything about the day, I still remember the feeling. It felt strange and foreign. No one knew what we were doing, but one thing we all agreed upon. In a few short days, maybe even hours, this thing called COVID-19, of which none of us had ever heard about, was going to have a stranglehold on the judiciary. And we knew we had to act, and we had to act fast. By the end of that day, an unimaginable supervisory order had been drafted. I placed an emergency phone conference with my colleagues, the full court, and our decision was swift and unanimous, and it was fast. It was the fastest conference we've ever had. Effective that day, no more jury trials, none, anywhere in the state of Iowa. I soon released a statement to the press and said, access to justice may look a little different right now, and it may require a bit more patience, but it will not succumb to COVID-19. Didn't I sound confident? I was scared to death. For the past 305 days, we have carefully monitored the pandemic and tried our best to balance the need of keeping people safe with our commitment, our steadfast commitment to conduct business in our courtrooms. And I am proud to report today with confidence that the judicial branch did not succumb to COVID-19. But it's not due to that group of people who hung out at the judicial branch building on that snowy day in March. It's because of the hard work, tenacity, and sheer guts of each and every judicial branch employee. Nobody said, "I won't do it." Nobody said, "I won't do it that way." If time permitted, I would utter the name of each and every one of our 1,700 employees in the judicial branch, and I would allow them applause for each name, by the way, just to show them my appreciation for what they have done to help the judicial branch remain open during the most trying of times. Let me briefly touch on some of the changes we actually made to the judiciary to ensure that all Iowans would have continued access to justice during a pandemic. Like most everyone else in 2020, we went virtual. Thank goodness our branch had the foresight about 15 years ago to plan and implement an electronic filing system, which allows us to be paperless. And thank goodness for you, our legislature, for making sure that we had adequate funding and maintaining that adequate funding to keep our technological infrastructure. We had to help our staff quickly learn the different forms of technology, and we used a wide range. With the help of our department in the technology, judicial proceedings and conferences could then be held remotely. There's maybe been an occasional child talking in the background or somebody having a glitch with their internet service. And everybody knows this: you're muted. But this technology allowed us to safely provide Iowans with access to justice during a vulnerable time. I sent out an email, I just kind of wanted an idea. How's it going out there? You know, I miss being in the trenches. I miss the trial court experience right out there, face-to-face with Iowans every day. It's a little different at the appellate level. So I wanted to know, how's it going with this virtual stuff? Are we doing okay? And I want to read an email response because summarizing it would not give it the justice it deserves. One of the benefits of virtual hearings are the pets: dogs, cats, fish, one pot-bellied pig, and an inside goat appearing for a hearing. Dogs are very interested in court, and they want to be heard, barking, whining, crying, and they want to be seen sitting on a lap or trying to climb up on a person. Cats, not so much. Cats have no interest in court. In fact, they have a complete disdain for the process. Usually they're hiding. Occasionally they show their contempt by laying on a keyboard or sitting in front of a webcam. I think we all have those experiences. We ask the people on our front lines. We have juvenile court officers, court administrator, clerks of court, judges, court reporters, just to name a few. But when we started realizing we got to figure out a way to do business different than we normally do, they helped us brainstorm and imagine what kind of guidelines do we need to have in place so that when Iowans come into any one of our 100 courthouses to go into one of our many courtrooms, they feel safe. Upon the recommendation of our newly formed Jumpstart Jury Trial Task Force, we began making preparations to dip our toes back into the water. We started with a few pilot trials, and although they resumed on September 14th, we had to shut them down about 2 months later because of an uptick in Iowa's infection rates. But the lessons we learned during those 2 months of pilot trials and then some other trials were absolutely immensely helpful when we resumed jury trials in just a couple weeks on February 1st. I was honored to have a front row seat, socially distanced of course, to watch a demonstration of how these Iowa jury trials could safely and effectively and efficiently unfold during a pandemic. I was blown away with what I saw. I'd like to tell you some of the things I saw in case anybody's wondering, what is a jury trial going to look like right now? In Davenport, jury selection was held at this big convention center. The next day, the jury that had been impaneled would meet at the Scott County Courthouse to convene in a courtroom there. In Waterloo, the summoned jurors were sorted into groups for check-in, and they were told to remain in their cars until the precise time on their notice. It might have been in 5-minute increments. That was to prevent the flow of people coming. And in Rockwell City, the Calhoun County Courthouse was used to pick a jury, have the trial, and return a verdict all in one day. Now, I was pointing out what's different in those counties. What was the same in all of our courthouses is that all of the courtrooms are COVID ready. Masks have been required for entering the court-controlled spaces. Seating for the litigants has been reduced to comply with social distancing, and if that couldn't happen, then we have used plexiglass dividers. Now, with these accommodations, what a courtroom looks like is you have the judge, court reporter, lawyers, their clients, and a jury. Some courtrooms have enough room for a little bit of the public to sit socially distanced. Others don't. In both of those situations, there's typically another room in the courthouse that has been set up for remote viewing for the public. Upon the recommendation of our newly formed Jumpstart Family Law Trial Task Force, and in an effort to keep those cases moving, the pandemic has had a stifling hold on our docket. The judicial branch approved new methods to resolve the disputes by implementing informal family law trials and mediation. In addition to our district courts, we embraced the input and assistance from other partners with a common goal of working for Iowans. For example, we worked closely with the Iowa State Association of Counties. We created individual but similar checklists to make sure that Iowans were faced with consistency when they entered a courthouse, whether it was to do business on the second floor with the Treasurer's Department or maybe go to the third floor and engage in business with the judicial branch. There would be consistency in our checks boxes, maybe not identical, but very similar. We also work closely with the Department of Human Services to protect the health and welfare of our children within the court system. When a pandemic prevents people from having contact anyway, we had to get really creative and make sure that children were safe, but we provided families with an opportunity to interact in a meaningful way. And in an effort to tap the public's input, we invited Iowans to email my senior law clerk their COVID-related questions. We could probably write a book of those. But those questions, some of them were kind of tough, like, how do you recalculate the statute of limitations when you guys have been messing with all the deadlines? Or some of them were kind of easy and quick to answer, like, where do I park if I'm in Harrison County? Or where do I pay my parking ticket? And then there were those really awesome shots in the arm. One was simply, hang in there. To maintain transparency and keep the public informed, we established and regularly updated our dedicated webpage about what we've done to address the COVID pandemic. I'd like to briefly tell you about a pilot program that actually was in the works before COVID, but I want to talk about it because it has become extremely relevant during COVID. It's called the Distributive Work Processing Pilot. If I were to name it, I would call it something like share the work and keep the rural courthouses hopping, because that's what it's about. The timing of that pilot, as I said, was wonderful for a pandemic, but I'm hopeful that it will be successful and continue throughout the state. Instead of looking at the workload and the staffing of one county and comparing it to another, this pilot looks at the workload and staffing of an entire district, and then they redistribute it to make sure that the work is flowing evenly. I'd like to give you an example that I think brings it to life. In Potawatomi County, there is more work than there are employees as far as a workload formula. It's kind of tough to get some of the work done in a timely fashion if you don't have as many people as perhaps a workload formula predicts. With this pilot and through technology, the workload of all the counties in the 4th District are evaluated and redistributed so that staff in any one of the other 8 counties can kick in, chip in, and help out Potawatomi County. This is radically different than how we've done it in the past. Historically, Shelby County could only do Shelby County work, and so on with every other county. For one county to be able to assist another county in need within the same district, whether it's during a pandemic or not, this keeps each county relevant, no matter the size. That's a really good thing, says the rural judge. As if the pandemic isn't a big enough challenge for Iowans, a derecho ripped across the state on August 10th. Who even knew what that word was? I certainly had never heard it. Crops and houses, businesses, courthouses, neighborhoods, unimaginable damage. For days and for some people weeks, Thousands of Iowans did not have access to electrical power or water. Some people could not even access their courthouses, not only in person, but even virtually, because their internet had been shut down through the devastation. During that time, our employees in the affected areas worked hard to keep court services available in those areas for the Iowans who needed it, all while dealing with storm destruction in their own personal lives. I am proud of the resourcefulness of the judges and our staff, and I am thankful for the cooperation of local officials that enabled Iowans to access the court services they needed during that during that derecho. And then during the summer of 2020, in the midst of developing a plan for resuming court services, yet another national crisis emerged. As public servants, our task is as simple as it is solemn: to provide justice without fear, favor, or affection. Long ago, we recognized that justice doesn't just come out of our opinions. It also is addressed in our committees, our work groups, our commissions, our rules, and our task forces. Over the past 6 years, the judicial branch has dedicated itself to implementing initiatives that are designed to identify and eliminate discriminatory behaviors that may compound the disparities present in our system of justice as a whole. Chief among these initiatives is to provide implicit bias training to all judicial branch employees. This training is designed to expose people to their unconscious biases and to provide them with tools to adjust automatic patterns of thinking. The judicial branch remains steadfast in its commitment to becoming better public servants. And moving into 2021, we are strengthening our efforts and starting a 2-year pilot that will engage all employees within the judicial branch with the goal of mitigating implicit bias in the areas of race, gender, and other identified protected classes. You know, when I first became chief, I was asked all the time, what are your priorities? What are your priorities? And I was like, oh, I haven't thought about it yet. And that lasted like 2 weeks before COVID came to town. Since that snowy day in March, not one person, I am not kidding, not one person has asked me, what are your priorities? Duh. It's because everybody knows the answer. It's a dirty word, COVID. But when that virus is no longer my priority, which I believe is right around the corner, I have an answer for that question. Child welfare is profoundly important to me. You may not know this, but in my prior life, I was the cookie judge. It was my way of connecting to children who were experiencing severe neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental health issues. These cherubs stole my heart, and it became absolutely critical for me to help these parents succeed in our judicial system so that they could safely be reunited. I have 2 priorities as chief, both of them related to child welfare. Probably not a surprise. FFPSA is a federal funding bill, and it stands for Family First Prevention Services Act. But you know me, I like to rename things to make it relevant. I would pick something like Bucks to Keep Kids Home. The Supreme Court formed a task force, and they refer to this legislation as Family First. That's probably a more appropriate title. Prior to Family First legislation, federal funding could only be accessed when a court order had been entered removing a child. That's wrong. Money, if removed. Studies show that in many cases, the long-term trauma experienced by a child who's been removed and placed in an out-of-home placement, such as foster care perhaps, sometimes that may be worse than any trauma with actually staying in the home. With Family First, many Iowa families in crisis will now receive access to benefits sooner, before a child is removed from the home, rather than after the family has been separated. There are 2 very important pilot projects that have grown out of the Family First Task Force, and I could say a lot more about Family First as well. There's priorities on placing with family first. If you can't place with family, then you can place outside the home in a foster home setting, and only if it's therapeutic can you place them in group care. There's so much to it that I would encourage you to look into our annual report, which makes reference to it as well. 2 very important pilot projects grew out of the Family First Task Force. The State Public Defender's Office has a pilot project which has been approved by you, our legislature. This provides funding for a parent to have legal representation before a case gets filed in juvenile court. Historically, a parent has only been entitled to representation once something gets filed. Now, the catch there is that's almost many times, anecdotally, I would say 80% of the time, that's about the same time an order is entered removing a child. So think of the advice an attorney could give a parent, perhaps to take some steps that would prevent the child from being removed and maybe even from getting involved in the system at all. A second pilot project that came out of the Family First Task Force is called 4 Questions, 7 Judges. That's a great name of a pilot project to get a good idea of what it is. It's the brainchild of Judge Bill Owens from Ottumwa and Judge Linnea Nickel from West Union. They asked each other, how can we avoid removing children from their families? And they came up with 4 magical questions. 5 more judges across the state jumped on board with the other 2. And since that pilot started, even more judges, way more than 7, have adopted the project in their courtrooms. They obviously now need to change the name of their program. You can also read more information about 4 Questions, 7 Judges on the annual report, by the way, which was just released today. In this pilot, over a 4-month period of time, those 7 judges received a combined 83 requests for removal of children. Nearly half of them were denied. That's a good thing. That means the kids got to stay home. Out of the 44 requests for removal which were granted, over half of those children were placed with either biological family or family friends. Only 15 out of 83 requests went to family foster care. Now, I know if you don't have something to compare that to, you may not think much of that number, but in my experience, 8 years as a juvenile judge, that's impressive. 15 out of 83, that's a good number. Therefore, my first priority is to ensure that Iowa stands out among all the other states in implementing Family First. My second priority is to elevate the presence of family treatment courts throughout the state of Iowa. We can't limit a modern system of justice to what you guys are used to seeing on TV, the traditional adversarial. We can't do that in all settings. And in particular, child abuse and child neglect are best addressed through efforts that actually get to the root causes of the family's crisis. In Iowa, we have 12 family treatment courts across the state. The courts give people the help they need to transition out of our court system and into healthier, productive lives. That's win-win. That's really good for the participant, and it's really good for our state. Estimates show that since 2007, our family treatment courts have generated $17.7 million in cost avoidance for the state, while allowing a majority of the families to remain together while their parents are receiving treatment. In addition to keeping families intact, these treatment courts have reduced the number of young adults going into our adult prison system, and they have diverted juveniles away from the criminal justice system. The bottom line is, family treatment courts work. So what does a family treatment court look like? There's a program called STEPS in Cass and Audubon counties, southwest Iowa. I helped start that up several years ago. The STEPS team is a group of professionals in the areas of substance abuse, mental health, domestic violence, the Department of Human Services, the county attorney, and of course the child would have representation, and there were other professionals around the table as well. Every other week we would meet in the Cass County Courthouse, and our participants, we would join them in the courtroom. Attendance was taken, phones were also taken, and each name was randomly called out. The participants would take turns joining me up front, one at a time, and they always knew. They knew the role, they knew the shtick. I'm gonna ask them 2 questions. First question, how many days of sobriety have you had? Sometimes it was 1, and sometimes it was something else. My second question, since we last got together, tell me, what have you done, one thing you have done to make yourself be the best mom or dad you can be? And then we would go from there. I want to end my speech today on the same note as I began, hope. I can't think of a better way to illustrate hope than to tell you the story of Sean. I first met Sean in 2015 when his son Rylan entered the child welfare system for the first time. In 2017, Rylan became a part of the child welfare system for a second time. As the judge in Sean's case, I could not let Rylan be with his dad as far as in his care because Sean continued to test positive for methamphetamine and he refused to sign a safety plan. 3 months later, Sean agreed to try the STEPS program. And I say try with a little bit of whininess in my voice because that was the attitude. My first vivid memory of Sean in STEPS was when I confronted him about yet another positive meth test. And his response, when I called him to it, my body makes meth. I know me, I'm a mom too. I probably said something like, you know, I may have been born at night. I was not born last night. We went back and forth. I'm not gonna lose this argument. And we went back and forth in front of all the other participants. And finally I said to him, you know, there's nothing we can do for you here in STEPS if you won't be honest with us. We will accept you being dirty on a test. We actually applaud that you can admit that, but we will not accept your not being honest with us, and you're lying about it. Soon after Sean started STEPS, he got a job as a machinist in Atlantic. I think it's pretty remarkable that during his interview he said, I'm a meth user and I'm trying to get my kid back, and he was hired. That's something. During that time, Sean could not safely provide for his son, and so he was placed in family foster care, where he remained for about 1.5 years. He was in the home of John and Naomi, and they have a special bond that continues today, and that is because of their willingness to say yes to becoming a foster parent in the state of Iowa. Sean's mom was also an important part of his life through all this. She helped out with Rylan when she could. She gave Sean a place to live when he was trying to get sober. And she was also Sean's taxi for all of his many appointments, getting to work, court hearings, STEPS. Sean had a lot of OWIs and unpaid fines that prevented him from getting a license. Slowly but surely, meeting every other Wednesday, Sean was consistently testing negative on his drug tests. He was actively involved in his local church, and he was committed to his job. On one particular day in STEPS, I asked him my typical question, so Sean, tell me, since the last time you've been here, what's the best thing you've done for Rylan to be the best dad you can be? He just shot out of his chair, dug into his wallet, and held up something and just screamed, for the first time in 10 years, I've got a valid driver's license. And I tell you what, that courtroom erupted with hoots and hollers. People in family treatment court and oftentimes our criminal court system, having a driver's license is not the norm. I must say, at least in family treatment court, it is the exception, not the rule, to have a driver's license. This made an impact not just on Sean, I could see it in every other participant. Wow, he got his license back. In January of 19, soon after I transitioned from the district court to the Supreme Court, Sean graduated from the STEPS program. I learned through the grapevine that Rylan's case was successfully closed out, and he remains in his dad's care today. For the past 2 years, I've often thought about Sean. Just because a case is closed out doesn't mean everything's doing great, just means somebody else hasn't started a new one sometimes. I was hoping he maintained sobriety, hoping Rylan was safe. So what's been going on since that time? Sean and I recently reconnected. It was such an eye-opening experience for me to speak with him, and Sean candidly spoke with me about his meth addiction, more candidly than he did during STEPS. Sean continues to work as a machinist in Atlantic, and the company where he worked joined a big international company, and he was soon rehired where he remains today. After reconnecting with Sean, I asked him my 2 famous questions. So Sean, now that we're talking again, I gotta ask you, how many days of sobriety you got under your belt? And today, the answer is 1,031. And my second question, even though that's a good answer, I of course got to ask my second question. And what have you done since the last time I've seen you to be the best dad you can be? His answer was the same, 1,031. That's about 3 years, by the way. Sean is here today with his son, Rylan, his parents, Harvey and Judy, and 2 friends, Brandon and Dirk. Why don't you wave? There they are. That was even more applause, I think, than getting his license. Cool, Sean. And by the way, it is Ryland's birthday today, and everybody knows I told you I'm the cookie judge, and that's what would inspire me to make cookies as kids' birthdays. So, Ryland, I owe you cookies. I was a little busy these last couple days getting ready. I could stop Sean's story right here, and I think it'd be a great story about hope. Obviously, what a great, rousing, standing ovation for you, Sean. But there's a little bit more I want to tell you about Sean. 2 months ago, Sean went to work like every other day. Everyone was told to meet up because Bob, the boss, is coming to town. Sean thought, we're going to get a turkey out of this deal. It was about Thanksgiving time. He heard Bob starting to talk. Everyone was getting together, and Bob started talking about some award called the Spirit of Caring Award. And Bob started to talk about the recipient, who was chosen out of 3,500 global employees. He said the recipient was from Griswold. Sean's ears perked up. That's his hometown. As Bob provided more personal details about the mystery recipient, it dawned on Sean, that's me. So I would like to read to you what was said during this announcement of his award. By Bob, this year's recipient is receiving this award based on the following attributes: constant positive attitude, development of personal relationships with those around him, extremely dependable and flexible. Sean was awarded $2,500 to give to a charity of his choice, and he was also given a Crystal Spirit of Caring Award, which he told me he calls his Grammy. Sean shared with me that in the thick of his addiction, he truly wanted to be clean. He hoped for a better life. And through his participation in STEPS, Family Treatment Court, he is living that better life. Thank you, Sean, for letting me share your story of hope and how Iowa's judiciary helped provide a path for you to achieve your outstanding accomplishments. It's stories like Sean's that continue to give me hope for the work of our judicial branch. By adapting to the unprecedented circumstances that we faced this year, we have proven hope cannot be canceled. Hope cannot be kept at 6 feet distance. We will continue to provide Iowans with the access to justice they need to turn their hopes into reality. In closing, I want to thank my colleagues for their commitment to our work, and to you, the legislature, for your support with our work, and to give me this opportunity to speak with you today. On behalf of the people that we serve, I look forward to making sure that all Iowans who enter any of our courtrooms in any of our 100 courthouses receive the access to justice, no matter what's going on in our world. Thank you.
Will the committee to escort the Chief Justice please come forward and escort Chief Justice Christensen from the House chamber?
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa PBS Foundation, as well as generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa PBS.